Okay, we're gonna try this again. I lost the footage the first time, but it is Tuesday, which is 2 days after the Ludum Dare compo ended, and I made a game. It's complete. Made it on time. This is my 11th, I think I counted, Ludum Dare entry. Kind of been constantly doing. I think I'm counting one of the mini compos or mini jams or whatever. It was kind of crazy weekend. It always is. 2 days out, feeling fairly positive about how the game turned out. There were some bits in the middle where I was worried, but that always happens. But it came together at the end in a way that sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so I want to talk about the simulation that's going on behind the scenes, because it's maybe not obvious and there's a lot going on under the hood. How this game works. At a very basic level, patients come into waiting rooms in the ED and are triaged and will, depending on how sick they are, go to either an intensive care unit or go to an inpatient unit for recovery and observation. And then there's a couple other things. But the simulation is kind of robust. And hopefully that comes across, but things are happening, and they are happening for reasons that are good approximations of real hospital care and real patients, hopefully. So let's walk through what's going on. So a patient comes in off the street, and we got these bus stops over here, and they're spawning from either of those. And a patient comes to the hospital for a reason. So when they come in, if we go to one of these patients in the waiting room, they have a set of symptoms and they have a diagnosis that's generated. So basically, a patient comes in with a problem. Say, I can show you an example. But they have to be seen in order for someone to evaluate them and see what the symptoms are, and then a doctor has to try to diagnose what the real problem is and treat it to get the patient better. They also have an insurance company, which comes into billing. There's a whole billing stuff we'll talk about. And acuity scores really drive a lot of stuff. You shouldn't actually see this acuity score for this patient. That's a bug. But let me find a patient who has been admitted. So this patient came into the ED and has abdominal pain and head pain, but we don't know why they have those symptoms. Looks like they were admitted. Anyway, so the basic flow for a patient is they will come in and they will go to a waiting room. They probably would go to a front desk and then a waiting room, but the front desk it'd be one more thing that has to be implemented, and I just approximated that. And I haven't built it yet, but there would be kind of a triage thing that they would go through of you show up and somebody quickly assess you and see do you just need to go on back because you're missing a leg, or your cough is fine, sit it out, and we'll get to you when we can. But patients will go to the waiting room, and if there is a triage office, they'll go there and get triaged. So if there's no triage office, we just have to do first come, first served basis. Patients come in, all right, next in line, next ticket please, get into a bed. But ultimately, in either case, that is just to figure out who comes to one of these beds in the emergency department. So once a bed is available, the patient will transfer there. Then they will be cared for by a nurse, potentially, and a doctor will come by and assess them and figure out what to do. And that could be a number of things. If the patient's not that sick, if they just have a cough, get out of here, go home, you're fine. And if the patient is really sick, it is more well, send them upstairs. They're in rough shape. Send them to the intensive care unit because they're in real rough shape and need more care, or send them to the inpatient unit because they just need observation, or are going to be here a while or whatever. So the simulation kind of handles that. A patient says, oh, okay, I need to go You can see some patients transferring here. They will go from these emergency department beds to the elevator, up to wherever they need to go. They will find their way to an open bed that is better equipped to handle them. That's the idea. When I placed these couple of rooms over here, this is the nurse's station, the doctor's office, and a supply closet. Those are kind of important. Like those are every hospital department sort of needs them, which is why all three of these have this. The nurse's department, nurse's station, spawns a couple of nurses who are these folks. I don't know why they're all bundled together, but these are the folks, these are nurses, and they wander around. They kind of basically just bounce back and forth along the floor of the building, and whenever they'll check on patients periodically, basically, and say, try to provide some care, help stabilize them or whatever. Then there is the doctor who is walking around in teal. He just went into that patient's room, and he's going into that patient's room, and he will, or she, will go in and try to assess patients. So if we click on this person, what did they do? So the doctor came in and they ordered a lab test. So they're going to try to diagnose what these symptoms are potentially caused from: joint pain and nausea. So they waiting on a lab result. So they wander off and eventually they'll come back and reevaluate the patient. Then, okay, so these patients have left and we have 3 dirty beds. Wandering around, we have the gray Sims are cleaning staff. So they wander back and forth and clean rooms. So there they are. Cleaning is a bit time consuming. But they will clean rooms and then the next patient can get in the room. That's kind of the same basic idea for each of these departments. There's a couple of other things. So when a doctor evaluates a patient, they can recommend a number of different things. You see, I think there's going to be a patient in the elevator. Yeah, so this patient is, they're in a bed still. They're moving around. They're in a bed because they are admitted. They are leaving the hospital because this hospital that I built doesn't have the facilities to care for them, and I don't have an easy way to figure out. I didn't implement a grid way to show exactly what that reason was. Yeah, oh no, I didn't even show why they're leaving. That's unfortunate. That'd be a good thing to implement, but you did. So that is the reason these patients are leaving the hospital, though, ultimately, is because either to diagnose them, you need like a CAT scan or something like that, some sort of radiology, or to treat them after being diagnosed, you need to do surgery, and I haven't built an operating room, so the patients couldn't have done that, so they have to be transferred out. But in either of those cases, it's kind of, there's this process for patients, for the doctors to try to diagnose, and then once the diagnosis is there, is treat. And they treat through medications, procedures, or therapy, I think, are the 3 options, or surgery. And those are the pop-ups that kind of unlock things. If you played this, you've seen those. But those are just basically giving you some background and context and unlocking new things. So yeah, there's a fairly complex simulation. If I pick a patient, there's kind of a lot going on in terms of just the like clinical care of, okay, trying to figure out what's going on, and they have just some, I don't know why I implemented pain as a diagnosis. That's not a real thing. There's also a whole billing simulation going on, an insurance system going on, which is probably not the best use of my time, but it is important to healthcare in the United States, and it seems like something worth educating people on, though it's not accurate remotely in a lot of ways. Like this is a simulation of a fee-for-service model, and some real simplified insurance things going on. But so everything that is done to the patient, so like the physician comes in, it doesn't really cost anything for the physician to just visit with the patient, but there's the patient's going to be billed for that. The patient's going to be billed for being in a bed, though there's not really any direct cost, whereas it costs money to run a lab test, and the patient will get billed accordingly. So these add up, and so the actual cost to the organization is $331, but when this patient is discharged, they will be billed for this much. And every patient has an insurance company, which is just denoted by a couple of stars, which are just like how much the insurance company will reimburse the hospital for, or they might have no insurance, which is the other possibility. And if they have no insurance, or 1 star, you might not get the full. You might not make your costs back. It's a fractional percentage of this that you get back. In real life, if they don't have insurance, sometimes you pay the whole thing. Sometimes you pay a settlement, or sometimes patient just declares bankruptcy, and that's awful, and I didn't want to model that. But this is not how billing is done today, but this is how it's modeled. Diagnosis-based billing would be another complicated thing, and it'd be insane to try to balance, especially since the patients didn't get a diagnosis. So it'd be a whole thing. It'd be a whole thing. But yeah, there's this whole medical simulation. Oh, and once the patient leaves, you don't get paid for like a minute in real time, which is fairly fast in the real world. That would be extremely fast. Typically, hospitals are floating large amounts of outstanding expenses at any one time. So yeah, that's the simulation stuff. You can kind of drill into this, and you can kind of get a sense of what's going on. Oh, acuity score, which I don't know if I explained that well in the game. Would be like a measure that a patient would get probably through like an electronic medical record or something, where it's like based on their vital signs, based on their diagnosis, based on a whole bunch of factors, like what is their risk of death or complications or readmission, or there's different acuity measures for different things. But this is a simple way to kind of evaluate what's going on. And so it's just a number. The higher is worse, and the patient has to get assessed at some point to actually get an acuity score. But a lot of stuff is driven on that in the real world, and hopefully it kind of makes a little bit of sense of what's going on. And it's pretty obvious that this is sorted by the acuity score, because that's, these are your sickest patients theoretically. And so I've had a vague idea for like this sort of a game for a while. And let's see, I should probably mention that I have a day job, and I work in the healthcare industry making software. So like I have kind of a background in how hospitals are run and kind of the goings on behind the scenes. And I think that's interesting, and maybe it's because I've been in the industry for a while that I've got some Stockholm syndrome, or maybe I've been in the industry a while because it's interesting. But either way, there's a lot to run in a hospital that to my knowledge, that I haven't seen a game that really captures that. I also haven't really looked either, but like the last game I remember was like a theme hospital, which is a very comical take on hospital management, and it's not even that, it's more like a clinic. But there's a lot that goes into getting patients around a hospital and getting the right care for them, and getting them out the door quickly and effectively. And there's a lot of things that go into it anyway. So I kind of had this vague idea that I wanted to do something Sim Tower style. Like that seems like an art style and a mechanic like that I could implement in a weekend. It seemed reasonable. It seemed like a good idea. And this theme I think fit, though I didn't quite nail it as much as I had some plans that would have nailed the theme a little bit better, because I mean, it is, in some ways, this is me taking a game idea and trying to cram it into a theme as opposed to organically from the theme. But yeah, anyway, what do I think about it? We'll talk about the theme a little bit more, but what do I think about it? Overall, I think it's fun. Like mechanically, it's fairly solid. The simulation is okay, and I think it's mostly pretty good. I think you can play this and understand it. I think the tutorials are good enough to make sense of what is going on, hopefully. But I think it's baseline fun, placing buildings and watching things unfold and watching this simulation and seeing details about how patients are, who these patients are and what's going on, and learning their story is kind of, I think, hopefully interesting. Let's see, quality-wise, I think the quality level's good. There's a couple tweaks, a couple little tweaks that would go a long way that I just ran out of time for. I think the audio is kind of nonsense. Like, the idea was like, okay, it's a loudspeaker that is making announcements, because that happens in a hospital occasionally. It's not really that common, but the audio was slammed in like 30 minutes total, and it's me recording into a microphone and then throwing it through some filters and stuff and reversing it and calling it, yeah, it's good. Adding some beeps to, like, the beeps are more realistic than the loudspeaker, and since you can't make out the loudspeaker, it probably just sounds like garbage. But art quality, I think, is pretty good. The animations are fine, I think. It's definitely understandable, and people move fast enough that you don't really notice some of the weird hinkiness with them. I think there's enough variety. I think the color scheme is good. Hopefully it's pretty clear that, like, okay, the one mechanically thing that I'm worried about is that it won't be obvious that, like, if I put the wrong nurse's station or the wrong doctor's office on this floor, the doctor or nurse that spawns from there won't treat the patients in these rooms, because they are, like, it's a emergency nurse and they can't find an emergency bed, because that's what they're looking for. The color scheme, I think will help with that, and kind of the way I've laid out this menu, I think helps with that, but it may not be obvious, and I don't communicate as a player. But I think art quality is pretty good. It's a basic pixel style, but I mean, I think it kind of sells the idea of what these buildings are, and yeah, I think it's good. In terms of the theme, I don't think I nailed it as much as I would have liked. I had a couple plans for addressing theme a little bit more expressly, like the basic idea that the tie to the theme is, like, you have more patients and that creates a lot more problems. Like, as hospitals get bigger, they get a lot more problems. I don't know if that comes across, and the increasing problems is not quite as reflected as well as I would have liked, because the patients are kind of capped by the number of waiting rooms. So if you have extra patients, they just sort of leave. And it, like, there's kind of some problems that, like, okay, you get more patients and more patients, and dealing with them in a cost-effective way is difficult, but that's really only a vague threat, because your money doesn't change that significantly from day-to-day operations, which is one of the problems with the game. It's like the money, I think, the ongoing money is not balanced well enough. And also, it doesn't matter. You can go into the negatives, and you can just keep going. Nothing stops you. Ran out of time for that. But the one thing I really would have liked was to really highlight the problems, like the worse it is, specifically, like, the problems you might have to make as a hospital administrator are awful. Like, what were some of the examples I had? Like, do you want to implement a policy that would reduce duplicate radiology procedures? Radiology procedures are something that, like, in the real world are highly profitable, but as a patient, you don't want to get unnecessary tests that are also expensive. That's not great. So, okay, you're a hospital administrator, do you want to implement this policy that would reduce duplicate tests? That's the right thing for the patient, but you will make less money. And those are the sorts of choices I wanted to, like, kind of force you to make. And it's like, okay, you got a lot of patients, like, here's this awful decision point that is, not great. There's one small sliver of that here, which is on any of these patients, this is a perfect example. This person doesn't have any insurance. And if I were a monster, I would kick them out of the hospital right here and right now, because they're not going to be able to pay for the bill. Look at that, I'm a monster. So that's like the one little aspect of like, you will do better in the simulation if you aggressively get rid of patients that have no insurance. That's an awful thing. That is what a monster would do. But that is a bit where the theme ties in. It is not as strong as some of my other games, and I think those like decisions that you make, even if they're kind of just affect your money and don't really affect anything else, maybe give the illusion that they're doing other like more stuff under the hood. But having to make decisions like that, I think, would tie more into the theme. As it is, I don't know that people are going to get it. I think I'm not going to do well on theme, but that's okay because I made this game. Hopefully people learn something from it. That's kind of the other thing is there's a lot to healthcare delivery and kind of getting a sense of, what are all these departments in a hospital for. Hopefully somebody picks something up from that. That'd be cool. Of like, oh, okay, that's why, these things exist and kind of how these people interact. I don't know, the simulation might be too non-obvious to really get that, but hopefully somebody learns something. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about the simulation is patients can die, which is what's going on here. So the black, like that's the idea is you being carried off on a stretcher. So if patients have a high enough acuity, they just have a chance of dying. Gets the point across, like implementing a system for coding patients is a whole bunch of work. But anyway, I wanted to talk about some of the neat stuff in code, or stuff that I thought was neat. So I've implemented tutorial systems in a couple different games. I took a slightly different approach, and there's some good and some bad to what I did. What was bad, let's start there, was the actual like UI of it, as it pops up and kind of takes over your screen, but it's not super obvious that you can't interact with anything else until you click, other than, you try to click and it does that, but there's a bug in the framework, and I'm not going to say I'm fixing that for Ludum Dare. Yeah, blocking the player is not great. It would be better if what I've done at other times is like a little thing that slides in from the right and just kind of gives you a, hey, what do you do next? That would have made more sense in this case, but I was planning to I'd make this more of a dialogue style, because I was eventually going to feed this into a dialogue engine that would have you make some choices of what do you want to do. I think I talked about that. But so I was planning on doing that, and since I was planning on that, I wanted to implement it with the same system. But now it's just out of place because it didn't go down that route. But the actual implementation was pretty slick this time. What I've done in the past is that little control that has the tutorial kind of is like it pops up at the start, and then like you click through some things, and then it says it kind of hides itself, and then somewhere else in the code, when a certain event happens, that like raises an event that is listening for, and that like, okay, you've advanced on, and it's kind of a callback nightmare. The way that's implemented, that's always been a kind of a pain. So this is a much simpler thing. It is less efficient, also way simpler. What's going on instead is this is just all implemented as an asynchronous, like a single asynchronous method that is going through like that whole tutorial in a linear fashion. And whenever the user needs to do something, like it just waits until that is done, which is a really inefficient thing. That's like checking every second, is the condition met? But that makes this so simple to write and so easy, especially since all of these are like, did you build this thing? Did you build this thing? Did you build all of these things? So it's easy to, well, I already have an asynchronous like dialogue thing. I built that for the adventure game I made a while ago, and then I used it last time, and it annoyed me a lot because you can't click to advance, and I fixed that as part of like the prep for Ludum Dare. It was like, I'm gonna fix that because that annoyed me so much. But so like essentially I just have a very simple way to like show some text. It'll make you like click through it so you can read it asynchronously. So that's what this is it's like show this text, and then this unlocks stuff in the build menu, and then it waits until you've built these things. So very simple, and I think that was an effective use of time, an effective method of doing this. what was I going to talk about? Instantiating rooms. One thing I did differently. Usually I've got this whole framework, this whole pattern of, well, kind of a scene, which is here is the thing on screen. There's a set of controls, which are like the interactive elements on screen. Oftentimes I'll have one control that is like the game itself, just to handle the interaction stuff. And then behind that, there's a model that is the like model of the game world and all of the game elements and how they interact, and a separate model, which I did. That is all still here, because I'm using my game library that has a lot of that control stuff and scene management stuff. But then I built the model for how these different things interact. But usually I will also build a set of like templates which define like a template for a room or a template for a patient, and then like based on that I can instantiate the object, and then the object can tie back to the template, and that kind of defines the behavior. And it's not, there's a lot of reasons why it's not great, it's never been elegant, and to save time, what I did instead this time, I just built those models, and as opposed to like, if I make a new room object, what I sometimes have done in similar cases was like, one of the parameters to the constructor is like the world, and it just places itself immediately in the world. I didn't do that this time. The object is placed in the world explicitly. I'm getting ahead of myself. But there's no template. Like, I knew that wasn't going to work because there's so much variety, and it was just going to be a bunch of overhead for not really much benefit. But every room is, all of these rooms are different. There's not that much similarity, and it would be complex to have like a set of delegates or something, or constantly calling out to another file to manage that. So like the room, like each room is fairly simple. It all inherits from that basic room. And so that makes it complicated because I can't reference the template to say what can I build. So what I have to do is I have in the build menu, every item in that build menu is actually like a, it's an action that generates a room. So if I need to know the name of this room for this menu item, I just make one, and then I ask it what its name is, and then I discard it. Super dumb. Also really fast, as it turns out. And you know, like making objects just to get a name or something. C# does optimizations for stuff like that that are pretty reasonable. Performance is not bad here. This is not the bottleneck. But that's a really effective way of doing this, and definitely wish I'd done that in the past for some things or figured it out. That's a very simple way of like managing that, is the just fast and loose with these things, and that lets them have all of their logic in a more contained fashion. Let's see, pathfinding. Pathfinding was pretty simple, but it was effective because I made some decisions early on about how this was going to work. So all of these buildings are square, or rectangular. So there's like 3 rectangles that define like this, this building, this building, and this building. And I know that I only have these walkways here and the ground level that you can travel on. So when, I don't have anything built on this building, but if a patient was over here and they need to get over here, then they would, okay, let's say they're up here. They know that they cannot just go left and get there. They have to go down, and there's, I did some special handling to make sure that you have elevators. It's not perfect and you can still do dumb things, but at the very least, they will try to find an elevator on the floor, go to one of the floors that they can just go left at, and then go left. And then when they are in the building where they need to go, they will find an elevator and go to the floor and then go left or right. So it's that sort of pathfinding is always time consuming, but it worked out, and I think it was simple and gives a lot of sense of what's going on, and it doesn't require like actual pathfinding, which it seemed like it would be harder to implement something that was realistic and meaningful. Also, one other dumb trick, where like there's all of these enums for symptoms, and I didn't really want to implement like another switch like function that is like, give me the name of the symptom given the enum value. Like, I've done that a bunch. It's dumb. And it was something that I was going to need because I was going to spit that on a screen. What I instead did was this dumb trick, which is I grabbed the toString for the enum, which gives you the actual like name, which isn't really readable in like this case, shortness of breath. So I made this little function that just goes through and turns that string into a readable string, because I generally name my stuff with Pascal case. So it ends up with a pretty decent result. And it saves me, a little bit of work, which I'd actually like implemented in a couple different places, because there's like the symptoms and diagnoses, and then every room I am looking to the name of the object. I always have the same arbitrary naming scheme. So like I just strip off the first letter and then use the rest. But that left me an option I could override it to, like for this one where it's M radiology, which I didn't like the name of, and I didn't know what to rename it to. So that's code side, what I thought was interesting to talk about. So I want to talk about some of the problems with the game, which I kind of realized after more playtesting that there were some problems. I think it's mostly good, and the experience for most people for Ludum Dare will be pretty good, but some things I wish I did better. Really wish there was a title screen, but more I wish that there's something of interest in the background. I kind of want to do some like parallax buildings. It's just one of those things where I just ran out of time of, get the world set up early and then go, well, I'll come back to do that. No, I won't. So yeah, that seems like the sort of thing that like should have taken 10, 15 minutes maybe, but yeah, I mean, the result is kind of just this blue background. At least I have this gradient as opposed to just solid color, but I wish there was a better background. The actual level design, this building over here is not great. You really can't use it for anything. It should be bigger. Once you put in the basic stuff you have to have, like nurse's station, doctor's office, and supply closet, you basically, and an elevator, you've basically taken up half of the building's width. So like this building is just too narrow. And that's the sort of thing you don't realize until you really had more time to play test. Also, like there's no reason to fill these buildings. The rate of new patients kind of caps off at a certain point, which is like kind of what I was expecting, but also in practice, it's not as much as I was kind of expecting for like a fully scaled hospital. Like if you fill this building and then fill like a couple of floors over here, you're not going to fill all your beds ever. It's the waiting rooms will be, not super full usually. Also, there's no real penalty to like having to turn patients away or anything like that. It's just like patients come and, well, your waiting room's full. Which is really just a simulation of the wait times are too long. And that's maybe what I should do, is like how long are the wait times, and then I don't know, anything I did better than that, other than just give you more patients to work with so that you could kind of fill this, would probably not have made sense for Ludum Dare. And I'll talk more about like things I would improve, like as like a post Ludum Dare thing. In a minute, but one of the other big things is that I didn't implement trauma. So I'm betting this patient has trauma. Oh, failure of the kidney, that's bad. Ooh, and surgery didn't even resolve it. Sucks for them. So this patient has trauma, which is like a special condition in the game that you can't really do much to treat well. Like you can't effectively treat trauma, and it's not. It should be kind of a special class of things because it's really bad, and the patients are high acuity. That's why I figured it was one of these two. And actually, does that first patient have no? But like, it should immediately be obvious that trauma is the diagnosis. Like that should just be a given. They should like immediately skip the, they should probably skip the line for triage and just be the front of the line in the waiting room. Dealing with it is what I wanted to do, and I had even the art built for it, was like a trauma bay, which is like if you went to the hospital missing a leg, you would probably go to like a special room that is for trauma, and they would try to stabilize you to just resolve, what's going on, to stop the bleeding or whatever and get you stable so that then you can move somewhere else. And that's what I intended to implement. I even made the art for it. It's just a reskin of the operating room that looks more like the ED. But it would be a more involved thing to actually implement that than, like, I couldn't just copy and paste code. It was going to be a little bit more involved, and I ran out of time. But that would be like the next thing I would implement if I had a little bit more time. Because it would be, you end up with patients that you just, like, the things that the doctors try to do to treat that are just not fast enough for how worse the patients do with trauma, and like nurse care doesn't counteract it. So that's a bummer. Wish I had time. And the economy overall is not super balanced. I've been running this for a while, and I'm not making a ton of money overall. I don't know if like all the costs and bills should just be multiplied by 10 or what, but you don't make money fast enough ultimately. It doesn't matter because you can go below 0 and just keep going. Nothing stops you. Nothing actually checks the number. But yeah, it's the numbers seem, I don't know. I don't work on the billing side of the hospital, so I don't know numbers, but I don't know numbers. That's true. I don't know like what are good estimates for procedures and things, so they're super arbitrary. They might be vaguely, some of them might even be in a ballpark, but probably not. And maybe I should just multiply what you get by 10 or something. Yeah, I'm not really sure how to do that, how to make that better without making the numbers kind of unreasonably large. But ultimately, like, it takes a long time to earn back money, and part of that is like you are floating costs for a while, and there's a number of things that go into it. But and maybe we'll talk about improvements. I had some ideas on that might help, but it's still ultimately like you are not making as much money as like would be a balanced game. So I'll talk about future plans for this game. Let's talk longer term. Actual marketability of something like this, I don't think is great. I don't think this would be a good candidate for like a really deep polished job and a lot of development time. Like the overlap of people that would be interested in the healthcare industry and interested in a deep simulation, assuming I like really kind of went down that rabbit hole, which is where this ultimately needs to go, I think. I don't think there's that big of a crossover. Like, I'm kind of mentally comparing it to Production Line, which is a very deep simulation about the automotive industry, but I think there's a much bigger overlap between the automotive, like people who are interested in the automotive industry and people who are interested in a deep simulation. There is probably some small market for a deep healthcare simulation on this sort of a nature. Does that overlap also include people who would appreciate pixel art? And getting even smaller. So like maybe someday I will polish this up and really kind of make it a complete product or something and put it up online on Steam or something. But not soon in any case, because I have a day job in the industry and this is a little too close to home for, ongoing like work. Did I ever build a supply closet? I never built a supply closet. Does operating rooms not get dirty? That's a bug. Operating rooms should be dirty. I should need a supply closet down here. Anyway, I made the art for it. I must have forgotten to code it. But shorter term, I might polish up what I have and make a better, more complete Post-Compo version of this. I've got some time in the next couple days because I'm flying on a business trip. I've got a bunch of long flights and layovers and probably some time in a hotel with who knows how good of Wi-Fi. So if I'm not raiding games, then I might just poke at this a bit and just kind of implement some of the stuff that I left on the cutting room floor and kind of go maybe a little bit deeper on things. That's also why it's Tuesday in the middle of the day and I'm at home recording this as opposed to at work, is because I got a flight later. So yeah, if I was going to do a post-compo version, which I suspect I will, unless I get on the plane and just zonk out, or get on the plane and go watch a movie and don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. I don't know. I'd implement that trauma bay as just like a way to deal specifically with trauma and kind of make the trauma a more seamless process. And I'd make this building bigger for sure. Maybe make this building bigger as well. If I did that, I might want to create a way to section off departments. Because right now the staff just sort of bounces around through the whole floor, which is like they're bouncing around over here and that doesn't do me any good. Or if like it makes it so that like one floor is kind of a department, which is actually kind of true to life, but not always. And if I made this building a lot bigger, or a decent bit bigger, then it would make more sense to have some sort of section like fire doors or something that just sort of like make the staff kind of keep to their area. Let's see. Probably improve the diagnosis balance stuff. It seems like, I was going to show this as an example of like, oh, look, there's been forever and they haven't had a diagnosis, but they do. But some of the steps to get a diagnosis are not, I don't know, they seem to take a while. And there's a lot of patients that just get discharged without a diagnosis, which is weird. Or like they'll take a while to get evaluated. I don't know, actually all these examples I've been clicking on are realistic, that are like kind of reasonable. I changed this to arthritis, though that's a weird symptom for arthritis. Yeah, I should probably evaluate some of this stuff and some of the math. Yeah, I don't know what I would change. Pain is not a good diagnosis. I would change it to something else because the patient is increasingly getting worse with pain. I don't know what I'd replace that with. Something. I just want to point out that the medications are all named after Pokemon. Thought you ought to know. Yeah, okay, well, other things. It'd be kind of neat if guests visited the admitted patients. That would be kind of neat. It would make the elevators a little bit more hectic. There's not really a reason to build the better elevators. Like they usually aren't the bottleneck. Like maybe they would be in this building if it was full, but it seems like they are not the bottleneck. So if guests were also competing for the elevators, they just come up, see a patient, and then leave, or something like that, something basic like that. I was going to write down gift shop because that would be good if like they go see the patient. Maybe there's a chance they visit the gift shop on the way or something, or if they pass a gift shop on the way to a patient, they go in and shop, something like that. Oh, I'd build a bunch of support rooms that are real basic rooms that just reduce costs of things or reduce times of things, or would have other effects. Like a pharmacy would be kind of neat. Like, okay, you have a pharmacy down in the basement and they like send up meds to the floors, and that might be too deep of a model to actually have like supplies within the units. But even if they're just moving supplies, even if they're just like going and deliver, not really delivering anything, but just moving around, that would be kind of neat if they just then reduced the cost of medications. That would be kind of cool. A lab would also be similar, potentially, of like if it would, the lab right now is just like sit around and wait for a lab, and if it was like instead run a result down or something. I mean, like a lot of those things are sent through pneumatic tubes, or sometimes like somebody will come up to collect stuff, but that's usually only like an inpatient unit where there's a little bit more leeway on time. I don't think I would implement a pneumatic tube system, though maybe. I might do that. That sounds fun. Oh God, what am I getting myself onto? What are the other ones? Like a server room to just increase efficiency in something, like a billing office to get better results from the insurance, or better, like quicker times to get insurance back. I don't know, maybe medical records to do something, like occasionally save a test, like, oh, you need a test result. Oh, they've already had that, quote unquote, so you don't need to do it because there's a medical records office. Like just a chance to reduce that or something. Maybe implement a like a code blue, like a crash team, where like you build a crash team somewhere, and if a patient is in their dying throes, like if they're coding, then like a team has to run quickly and try to save them. Maybe if they're below a certain age or something. Got to model end-of-life care. So maybe I'll do something like that. That seems simple, and I started implementing. I created some of the variables, and then was like, I got other things to do. But yeah, just having like a patient coding as opposed to just the patient's just dead. More like, they get a high enough acuity, and then they code, and if they don't improve, or if that lasts for too long, then they die. But you can prevent that by having like a code team or a crash cart or something like that. What are the other things? I was kind of thinking about outpatient care or something like, oh, you can come in and have some elective surgeries. Those might be too much. Those might be too much for like a Post-Compo thing. I don't know. I got a couple long flights. We might see some of that. And then maybe like the OR scheduling is really dumb right now. It's basically like doctor goes in, oh, you need surgery. Is there a surgeon? Is there an OR available right this second? If there is, send them down. And if there isn't, well, tough luck, kid. I'll come back later and see if there is. And that's not ideal, but that's probably a whole management system that like isn't really necessary unless I had like elective surgeries, which is still potential. There's still potential there. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of things that would have to go into outpatient care, because you would have to have like a second set of waiting rooms and like clinic offices, and that would be a bit different. One thing I was going to change if I had more time was probably have the doctors follow more of a plan instead of just wander around randomly. It's maybe okay for some of the other staff, but the doctors seem to be key, and maybe they just are constantly jumping between the rooms that need them. That's a whole management thing, to queue to manage that. And I don't know if I'd do that or not, but that would make more sense for an outpatient unit where patient shows up, goes to the waiting room, and then gets roomed. And a lot of the systems would be very similar. New artwork for it. For a basic outpatient clinic would be very similar to this. It would just be very similar to an ED, but without the acuity stuff. And probably have to be a flag on the patient to say there's they are not here for an emergency, they're here for a surgery or something. They're here for a checkup. I don't know. I'm waffling. Other things, it'd be pretty easy to make some specialties like a cardiac ICU or cardiac care unit, or something like that. That like once they're diagnosed, with a specific condition, then they go to the cancer center or something. That would be something that would be fairly easy, and a lot of hospitals have like units like that for cancer, heart care, because those are usually complicated things. And I'd probably I'd have to do some modeling better. Actually, this is worth pointing out. There's a problem that the patients in the ICU don't really get any better care than anywhere else. That's one of the things that maybe would help with some of the cost stuff. But yeah, that would be something I would do, is actually implement, like, okay, as opposed to just these are extra beds that are more expensive, it's they help the patient get better faster, which, yeah, I never got around to. Yeah. So yeah, I got a long flight, and maybe I'll make some more of this. I'm hoping that I can rate games, but I'm recording this like 2 days after, because I've got this business trip, and it's going to be a weird one. I'd normally be playing games instead, but I don't know how possible that's going to be, because this is going to be a rough trip. So yeah. Anyway, that's the game, Triage Towers. I'm actually pretty happy with the name, of all things. Like, all my Ludum Dare games have bad names, with like 3 exceptions now, I think. I think there's 3 names that I think I'm okay with. I'd have to look at what they are, but anyway, yeah, we're gonna call it good. It was Ludum Dare 40? 40? 40? 40? 40? 40. Good. Triage Towers. You can play it now if you haven't already. I think this one's all right. Later.